Hello, everyone. Welcome to Where Are All the Women? I'm Megan Murphy. This is Mary Lou Singleton. How are you, Mary
Hello.
Lou?
I'm good. I'm tired. And again, I'm not keeping up with the rapid fire insanity of the world very well. I just feeling battered by the news. But other than that, I'm good.
There's so much new every week that it feels impossible to catch up. And I keep trying to, and I keep telling myself that I shouldn't bother trying because it's impossible. And then it's just even all more stuff the next week. And I'm
I
like,
know
they're doing this test on purpose, I'm sure, to keep us in a frenzy. Whoever they are.
they are doing it. It feels like that. It feels just like a psychological war, but maybe the world is just heated up, and with the global internet news stream, we're just living in a time where there's too much to pay attention to. We're not supposed to know everything going on everywhere.
No. What do you think is the most important thing to do or pay attention to in life? I know that's a big question, but I mean, on some level, I think sometimes we end up feeling like we should not be paying attention to any of it and just be paying attention to our own lives and cultivating sovereignty in our own lives. And then on the other hand, it's like we have to fight this stuff.
Right. I think the most important things to pay attention to are the non-news things. I think it's important to move our bodies and eat good food and hang out with the people we love. And sorry, I just flipped somewhere. There we go. It's like my computer just did something weird. Yeah, like the garden and your community and doing what brings you joy and paying attention to what's always been true, not all of the gaslighting and the newspeak and the rapid fire craziness. But it's hard because it's really attention grabbing. The craziness is hard not to pay attention to when it's coming in.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess I feel like in particular with regard to the men identifying as woman thing, it's tough because that seems like a big psyop. Like it's such a great way to distract us from everything because we have to have really basic conversations in a really insane way, and then of course are shut down at every turn. And it's really happening, and it really does have a real impact on women and girls and kids, like a really horrific impact. So I feel like it's so important to fight, but I mean, Lord, every time I feel like we're making progress, something crazier happens.
I know this boxing thing was really over the top. I thought it couldn't get worse than Laurel Hubbard, the weightlifter, but boxing is even worse than weightlifting. They just take it to the most extreme, and it does feel like a demoralization campaign against the women of the world, that this is happening and there's nothing we can do about it, and men can just claim our identity and beat us up in our sports, and a large chunk of the population celebrates it and makes excuses for it. This one was particularly maddening, how they brought in the quote unquote intersex aspect, right? Where first, everyone's fine. Everyone on the left who supports this madness is fine with just regular old autogynephilia ridden men being in our sports. They're fine with saying any man who says he's a woman is a woman and should be allowed to compete in our sports. But they love to obfuscate the conversation with disorders of sexual development. And the same people who say it's fine for men to be in our sports were like, well, this is actually a woman. This is actually a woman. When we could all see it's a man, we can all tell this person has male secondary sex characteristics. His hands are huge. His body doesn't look female. His jawline is male. He's been kicked out of multiple competitions for having male chromosomes. It felt like a whole new level of madness with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I feel like at least we are making progress on the, no males in women's spaces. And just because you identify as she doesn't make you literally female. And we're talking about biological sex and so on and so forth. And I felt like we were making progress, particularly in the realm of sport, as, first of all, as all these female athletes had spoken out, but, women like Linda Blade, who I interviewed on Friday, and people, and Colin Wright, for example, people who are kind of explaining the real physical differences between men and women that don't go away just because you add or reduce testosterone.
Right.
That, it has to do with going through puberty as a male, as an XY. And then they bring us back to the intersex debate, which I feel like we were having to do early on in this debate, where people were confusing intersex with trans and being like, I mean, people still do that, I guess. But I think this was quite big, like 6 or 7 years ago or something, where people would reference all these other cultures where supposedly there was a third sex, and, and some people are intersex and it's not as clear, yada, yada, yada.
Right. It did bring us back to that frustrating conversation that hadn't been taking up as much space. That was really big. Even, when I really entered this debate, like 2013, 2014, and then when was Caitlyn Jenner? That was 2014 or 2015.
Oh, that's a good question, because Caitlyn Jenner was like a significant moment for me, because that's when I realized that I had to use he pronouns, not she pronouns, just to be polite. And it was because I was trying to have this conversation about what was going on with Caitlyn Jenner. And it's, of course, very difficult if you're trying to, I think I mostly went through a period of trying to avoid pronouns at all.
Right.
And I think in some Facebook post, I maybe said she, and some of the radical feminists yelled at me. And I know this doesn't work on everybody, but it worked on me for this incident anyway, where I was like, oh no, Julia Long is right about this.
Right.
I was like, I need to just go with he. I mean, it didn't last very long that I was trying to work around this. But when you sort of first get into the debate and you're trying to, I think, seem rational and not turn people off right away, I think a lot of people go through this thing where they're like, well, if I just go into this lightly and politely, then I'll be able to convince. And of course, that doesn't work. So, and it's much more effective and easier on you, just in terms of your ability to have a real, honest conversation, if you just say what's true, he, him.
Right. Men are men.
Yeah.
So it was 2015. I just looked it up, and I remember that. I remember in that Facebook group when that was happening, and I remember you made a post once that said pronouns aren't the hill I'm going to die on, which I thought was such a funny thing to say. Like, where are we in terms of our discourse that we're even having this? But watching you in real time click with that. And
it was lasted like a few days before I was like, okay.
Right. But it makes sense. It's like, who cares about pronouns? But pronouns are all of it. That's why they're so insane about the pronouns in the bio. That's why they're so crazy about pushing the stupid pronouns all the time, because that's the mind control technique. That's their whole the whole rollout of this thing. Anyway, I remember when Caitlyn Jenner had the Vanity Fair cover, and it was all like Bruce Jenner all the time in the media. And every time I was arguing about, this is a man, men can't turn into women, and people would yell, what about intersex? And I would just reply, Bruce Jenner is not intersex. Like, this is a man who has fathered 5 children with sperm that came out of his penis while he was married. And he won his gold medals in an event only men can compete in the Olympics. But they still kept throwing it out. Like, what about intersex? For this guy is clearly not intersex. He's not a gynophile. And then to have to come back to here, we actually are arguing about, well, what about intersex? And we do need to have this conversation. And I think the activists are right that women's sports need to be for XX women, period. That's an okay boundary to have. And we can have a special category for men with disorders of sexual development where they can compete against each other or compete up against men. But this was a whole new level of demoralization and hatred of women. Watching people really enjoy a man beating up a woman on live TV was painful.
Yeah, I know. And the defenses of Imane have been getting more intense. I feel like after watching him announce, or the news announce that Imane Khalif had asked his lawyer, law firm, whatever, to file a complaint on his behalf around cyber harassment, I believe, and
against two
naming
billionaires.
J.K. Rowling and naming Elon Musk, and I think maybe for some reason naming Donald Trump, which makes less sense even, but people seem thrilled by that. Like, people are really excited at the notion that J.K. Rowling in particular, this is another thing that signifies that so much of this is about woman hating and misogyny, because I think that, to me, what I'm seeing in any case is joy and really a thrill at the idea of taking down J.K. Rowling in particular, less so than Trump or Musk, for example. And, they just, the idea of humiliating her and destroying her is really titillating to them and exciting to them.
I agree that they love going after a woman and taking down a powerful woman. I have to wonder how much is this millennial and Generation Z animosity toward J.K. Rowling, how much of it is coming from the fact that they loved the Harry Potter books. They grew up on the Harry Potter books, and they feel similar to how I feel about my old cohort turning on me and becoming a bunch of mandatory vaccine pushing pronouns and bio totalitarians, that they feel wronged by her, and how deep of a wound that must feel that they grew up on Harry Potter and loved Harry Potter and thought she was the bomb and created so much of their psyche around that fantasy world.
Yeah, well, and all the Harry Potter super fans are, pretty big nerds.
Yes.
Everybody, I think, liked those books or movies or whatever. I was like, yeah, they're good, but I was never a super fan. I was like slightly older than that all happened for, but the super fans are nerds, like, I think inarguably nerds, which there's a lot of crossover there with internet culture and gamer culture and the kinds of kids who are now young adults or older teenagers or whatever who spend a lot of time online. And it's those people also who have been very into the trans thing, like a lot of kids find transgenderism through the internet. A lot of these young women who transitioned and then afterwards detransitioned found transgenderism through Tumblr. Right. And so, yeah, I think that makes sense what you're saying, that all these kids who were like nerds who found a niche and found maybe their people or their culture or found some comfort in her books and the whole culture surrounding her books, that also would have been in these like gamer communities, like online nerd forum communities that were big into transgenderism, who would feel maybe betrayed by that.
Right, and transgenderism is fantasy and LARPing and like gender con, right? Like it's costuming. It has a lot of overlap with the people who get really into the fantasy world and lose touch with material reality. I think they're mad at her about it. I wonder where it'll go, and I wonder where they're going to sue. Like, where do they have standing? Where was this lawsuit filed? I didn't even look into that.
It was filed. Just give me a sec here. So the complaint was posted to the Paris prosecutor's office, Anti-Online Hatred Center on Friday.
Wow.
Anti-Online Hatred Center. It says in a statement posted on Sunday to Instagram, Khalif's attorney Nabil Moody said Khalif asked his legal firm to file a complaint with the Paris prosecutor's office on his behalf. So the complaint is around acts of aggravated cyber harassment with anti-online hatred with the Anti-Online Hatred Center of the Paris Public Prosecutor's Office. I didn't know that was even a thing that existed, which it's just so creepy that I feel like across the world, from Canada to the EU, they're going in so hard on the online hate thing, because that will muzzle everyone. It'll muzzle all of us. I mean, that's where all public discourse is happening. And the discourse that's not happening online isn't allowed to happen at all. Like, we're not allowed to. I mean, I talked about this last week, but our event that we've been planning on Vancouver Island for September 14th to talk about the gender identity stuff, our venue turned on us and canceled us after extreme harassment and threats from trans activists. And, that was sort of one of our only options. There's very few venues, including hotels, that are willing to host us. And that feels like it's gotten even worse. Again, as I've been thinking, things are getting better and the conversation is opening up. The conversation is opening up, but then as a result, I think these people are doubling down even more. And in Canada, in any case, I think these venues and these organizations and businesses are even more afraid of either losing business or, maybe being taken through a human rights tribunal or something for, hosting hate speech. Like, it's next to impossible to even find a place where we can have these conversations, which is really scary.
It's terrifying. What about a church? Could you do it at a church?
Yeah, churches will sometimes be okay. It's funny because I'm over on Salt Spring, and there's a church in town that's plastered with Satan flags. I'm like the church. A lot of the churches have gone all in on the whole, whatever that the inclusivity flag is called now, that went from pride to, LGBTQTI plus, et cetera, with all the extra triangles and circles and colors. Those are all over the freaking church downtown. I was like, oh, like I told you last week, I saw one on the back of the little bus. And this week I noticed they were all over the church. So there's ugly. 3 flags. They're so ugly. Like, I feel like it's so chaotic and unpleasant to look at. They're really ugly. Like, I find them really, they're not just like politically offensive, but I feel like they're visually offensive also, which I wonder if they know that or not.
I think that so much of what that represents culturally is really ugly. I don't think, blue asymmetrical haircuts and really large piercings and too many tattoos, I don't think any of that's beautiful. I think it's, and we could say, well, it's like a descendant of punk rock, and that was never meant to be beautiful. But even punk had an elegance to it, and the fuck you aesthetic of punk had an elegance to it. It wasn't just quite this haphazard. And like we talked about last week, the opening ceremony of the Olympics, it was just ugly and mediocre and grotesque. This whole movement has a like aesthetic ugliness to it that concerns me. We're just losing what is beauty. We're losing any any cultural appreciation of that as well.
Yeah, I was thinking about this yesterday actually, and the fact that the left has embraced really the ugly, gross, unattractive aspects of humans and humanities and gone after the right actually for doing the opposite. You
Mm-hmm.
probably remember that article that came out saying that like going to the gym was like a far right thing.
I know.
Like, but it's true. And when I think about it, this has been going on for a long time. It's just gotten way worse and more
Mm-hmm.
obvious, this idea that you should stay in shape, that you shouldn't be obese, that you should, try to maintain your attractiveness and
Mm-hmm.
health. Those ideas have been rejected by the left for a long time as sort of offensive and conforming to what the man wants you to be. Feminism did this, of course, and fighting fat shaming and
Mm-hmm.
trying to make obesity some kind of empowerment. Eat whatever you want. If you feel like having a cupcake and chips for dinner, then you should do that. And now with the truly grotesqueness of pride and even all of this, like forcing, I don't think that it's good to see models that are super thin either, but this sort of forcing the grotesque on us is a
Well,
strange phenomenon as well.
I would argue that Ozempic face is also grotesque.
Yeah, it looks really bad. All of those people look really
Yeah,
bad. I look at
it's
them and I'm like, I can tell that you're on Ozempic and you don't look good. You look
yeah.
too thin and you look old.
I personally think lip fillers and Brazilian butt lifts and all of those cosmetic surgeries look grotesque. And I think
That's
that
true.
pornography is grotesque now. There's no like beauty or
The
elegance.
exaggerated plastic
Yeah.
surgery is grotesque. Breast implants are gross. Like
Mhm.
I agree with you. I think breast implants look stupid and like when I see a woman with breast implants, I'm like, you look dumb. Like those don't look like your breasts. Like those
Yeah.
don't look nice. They look like a separate entity that's been attached to your body. Your lip fillers also look ridiculous.
Yeah.
You can do those things in subtle ways so that it looks okay if you have a lot of money. But most people don't. Most people look ridiculous. And it looks
Yeah.
obvious that they've done these procedures as well.
Mm-hmm. So there's like the grotesque is everywhere and ugliness is rising. And did this happen on the left coming, I think of, Soviet architecture, Eastern European Soviet artwork was very angular and ugly and functional. It wasn't beautiful the way Gothic architecture or the way classical architecture is. Things have gotten grotesque on the left before. Is this just something that happens when the pendulum swings in that direction, that it gets ugly that way?
Well, it's sort of, yeah, I mean, it seems like we have too much, we have access to too much. We aren't struggling as a species, I guess. We have access to not only a lot of food, our lives are very, very easy.
Yeah.
We're not fighting a war where we live in any case. And we're not fighting for survival and food and water or disease in the same way that we have for so much of history. And so we embrace the grotesque instead of the you look healthy and well fed and like you're not dying.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah, it's an ugly time in all aspects of that word. It's really an ugly time. So is there a fundamentalist church you can meet at, or like really conservative church?
I think that we may have found somewhere. We do still have some options, but we're gonna keep the venue secret for sure because we can't do it otherwise. We won't be able to. They'll destroy the building. They'll harass the staff into submission. I don't think there's anybody on the island, not in this. Victoria is a very, very woke city also. You know, Victoria is an NDP town. The people here have money, they're middle class or wealthy people, or they're university students, and they're progressive, and they love EVs, and they love bike routes, and they love, you know, every, you know, it's a small town, but you know, they had like a free Palestine march, and they're very into pride and everything that the progressive wokes stand for is embraced in Victoria. So, you know, there's different parts of the island where that wouldn't happen, but in Victoria, you know, Victoria is where we were all mobbed at the 1 million march for kids last year. And it was the only place in Canada where the rally was shut down. We didn't even get to the march because, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of wokes descended on us, and it was really scary, actually. So part of it is the location. We might have better luck in other places, but I mean, that's also why we chose the location. So it's not, I can pretend to be totally surprised by it, but it's a real struggle, and it's a real struggle in terms of deciding, you know, strategy, because, you know, we want people to come and we want people to hear about it, and keeping it secret isn't always conducive to that. But in this circumstance, I just don't think it's possible to do it otherwise. But yeah, if anybody is watching and you're on Vancouver Island or in Vancouver and you want to come, we have Linda Blade on the panel now. We have Mia Hughes of the WPATH Files. I'm on the panel, of course. Brian E. Dixon is on the panel, and Magdalena, oh shoot, I've forgotten her last name. I'm so sorry. I'm going to look it up in just a minute. But a young detransitioner who's been very brave in speaking out about her experience falling into the trans cult in Vancouver. So if anyone wants to come buy tickets, we are still doing it on September 14th, but you're not going to know what the location is, unfortunately, until the morning of. I'll put the links down below if you're watching on YouTube in the show notes, and I'll put it in the live chat as well. And it's also on my Substack at meganmurphy.ca. I did want to just get to this because I'm curious to know what you think. Tickled to Death asked about tattoos, and I find a lot of people online have been talking about, you know, being offended by women with tattoos in particular, or, you know, like when you're talking about like ugliness or intentional ugliness, they bring up tattoos, and people have asked me what I think about tattoos. And I don't have any tattoos, but I know a lot of people with tattoos that I think are quite beautiful. I mean, tattoos can be ugly too, but I'm not personally offended by tattoos. I've just never been so invested in something that I feel like I need to put it on my body permanently. Right. And I'm not into pain, so
I think that tattooing has gotten out of control. You know, tattooing used to be this very countercultural, in your face message that I don't care what anybody thinks. I'm going to do this. It was something that pirates and prisoners and soldiers did, right? This was a edgy thing. I have a lot of ideas about it. When I see someone with a lot of ink, I think that person most likely has a lot of trauma. I think a lot of people are working out their story and their trauma with the tattooing. It is a form of inflicting pain upon yourself. There's that aspect. I have 2 tattoos. They my first tattoo was definitely a trauma response. When my mother died, I just wanted to go get a tattoo, and kind of regret that one. The other one I have is a ritualized tattoo from the underground midwifery scene in the 90s, where everyone just had this particular tattoo on the inside of their foot that I wanted to be part of the club. You know, I was like, oh, these really cool women all have this tattoo, and I want to be one as well. That's a really small tattoo, but that one didn't so much come out of trauma. But I think it's interesting. I think tattoo culture is expressing, you know, what's happening with our society. I think that it's an in-your-face thing to do. It's like, look at me. It is kind of a narcissistic thing to do, to make people see your ink. If you're showing a lot of ink, it's you're
And to
gonna,
get people to ask you about them
yeah,
and to appear interesting often when you're not interesting. I've noticed that's a common theme in people with a lot of tattoos is it's like,
yeah,
oh, I think I learned this when I was younger, is that I would think that a guy looked cool and interesting, and then I would talk to him and he'd be like deadly boring that he had a lot
yeah.
of tattoos. I think the same probably goes for women.
When people like have so many tattoos that they can't cover them up, and it's yeah, I mean, it's fashion, it's a trend, it's popular. There's that aspect of a lot of people are just doing it because everybody's doing it right now. Um, but I often think it's a trauma response. So I think that it's a way of working through a story. And when I say narcissistic, that's not really the right word. It is this like, I need my pain to be acknowledged. I need my story to be acknowledged. I need my specialness to be acknowledged in this way. And I'm sure there's some artistic people where it's just an artistic expression for them to put art on their bodies. It's not a monolithic phenomenon. There's that great book by, what's his name, Theodore Dalrymple. He's a psychiatrist in the UK, and he wrote this book called Life at the Bottom, which would be a great book for people to check out right now. It was written in the 90s, I think, and he talks about what he saw starting to happen in society, that the middle and upper classes were starting to take on habits and aesthetic practices that before had just been in the underclass and in the underculture, and what he thinks that meant in terms of the mental health of a society. So interesting things like
Yeah.
this. It's not good when these underclass, like underculture practices become mainstream. It means our society's collapsing.
Right. And that's been happening for some time now, where the upper classes have really fetishized marginalized culture. That happened with rap music and rap
Mm-hmm.
culture. And then that's happened again, of course, within feminism and woke ideologies, where everyone is trying to LARP as oppressed and marginalized when they're
Mm-hmm.
not.
Right,
They
right.
really, really want to be oppressed and marginalized and to be suffering in some ways despite their extreme privilege. I noticed that also, where a lot of the women who are covered in tattoos, like where their full chest is tattooed, or their faces, when it's like their full arms or legs or all of it, that most, if not all of them, have some serious trauma,
Mm-hmm.
childhood trauma often.
Yeah, and a lot of people do. It's an interesting thing, just how common it's become. For me, I'm just such a counter. I'm a real contrarian, and I'm always swinging in the other way of the herd. And like, I am completely uninterested in marijuana now because there's a weed shop on in every corner. Like, I liked it when it made you an outlaw. I dug that. I thought that was cool. Like, if we're getting high together, we know we both have anti-authoritarian sentiment, and that's bonding. Like, I know something about you. Now I just think it's boring. I feel similar to tattoos. I think that right now, being a sober, straight edge family man with no tattoos is punk rock right now. That's
Yeah.
counterculture.
Yeah, you're right. I know. I'm starting to think that my foundational personality trait is in large part being a contrarian. I mean, it's like, but not going along with the crowd. It's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
just about like arguing for no reason or being difficult for no reason, but it's like, oh, everyone's doing this. Like, I don't want to do what everyone is doing.
right.
That's not usually the right way, or at least questioning it. And yeah, like, I mean, yeah, the rebellion now would be to say that you're a Trump supporting family man who, is committed to his wife and doesn't watch pornography and goes to church.
Right.
Right?
Totally. Totally. And then it's going to swing in that direction, and I'm not going to like it that there's pressure to conform to that. And I'll, if, depending on whether or not I'm still alive, I'll swing in the other direction. But I think that these practices that marked a subculture in the past lose their charge and their power and their meaning when they become mainstream. It's no longer it's no longer a unifying bond among a subculture of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's not rebellious to identify as queer or trans at all. It's the cool thing to do, and it's what makes kids fit in instead of feeling excluded, really, which is ironic because all the language surrounding transgenderism, the language that was used against us and then in favor of the Ambrosia banquet hall when they canceled us was, all these trans activists were posting saying, thank you for being an inclusive venue after they'd canceled us, after they literally excluded us. But, I mean, it's the thing that will make you not just feel included, but be included in everything so that you don't get debanked and so that you don't get ostracized by society or kicked out of your university or fired or beat up or excluded from renting a venue to have a conversation about women's rights is by going along with, queer ideology and transgenderism and so on and so forth. It's so strange that they can't recognize that. Like, they're so stupid. Like, I'm sorry to be rude, but I really think they're very, very stupid. Like, when you read the words that these people are saying and you listen to what they're saying, they're completely stupid. They're not thinking at all about the words that are coming out of their mouths and what they mean, because if they were, they wouldn't be going on about inclusivity and respect and love and kindness and hate and all of that when they're obviously the ones who are being exclusive and hateful and and deeply unkind.
Deeply unkind. Yeah.
Do you think that they're stupid? It's like sort of sad to say, but it's like I've sort of got to the conclusion that I'm like, some of it is just simple, which is that a lot of people are kind of just stupid. Or they just don't care. Like they want to be included more than not included. So they'll just say whatever, which I also think is just kind of stupid. Like at least you're not a very ethical person. And I don't know, you're probably not like a super deep thinker if you're like, I'm going to go along with what everybody else is saying that I should go along with.
I think a lot of people love to join a mob. They love to be part of something where the rules are certain. They, it's like a religion to them at this point. The woke and queer ideology is a real sense of belonging for them. Yeah, I mean, I'm tempted to use the word stupid. There's that psychological term, received knowers, right? There are people who all of their information comes from what they have received from others, and they can't really think for themselves. And I guess it's synonymous with stupid.
It's not, it doesn't sound like it's not a very useful analysis, I guess. Yeah. It's like, if you want to, maybe it makes you sound smarter if you call it all Marxism.
I know, exactly.
Instead of just they're all stupid.
Right. And well, I don't think most people can be relied upon to think for themselves and to think through the ramifications of what they're advocating for. And human history is just littered with, one atrocity after another that arises from this kind of behavior that is all too common in our species. I don't like it that it's the majority of people. It's upsetting.
No, it's totally depressing. I did want to note, I meant to do this earlier, that we had yet another where are all the women incident after Piers Morgan tweeted on Friday from Emmeline Pankhurst to this: where are the world's feminists now as women's hard-fought rights get so shamefully destroyed? And this was a picture of Imane Khalif on the shoulders of, I guess, her I'm terribly sorry, his coach or trainer or something like that. And somebody, I don't know if this is true or not, but someone pointed out, I think one of the ex-Muslim women pointed out that if Imane really was a woman, he wouldn't be doing that in public, getting on the shoulders of his coach or trainer, because it would be inappropriate for a woman in the culture.
Yeah, he would be socially punished, just beyond the comprehension of Western women. If this was a woman with her crotch wrapped around the back of a man's head on international television, that is not going to go over well in the Muslim world. It's just more proof that everyone knows he's male, including his coach. It's another slap in the face to women. So he could have easily had Jennifer Say come on and talk about being an Olympian, being the brand, being the owner of XXXY athletic clothing, being a huge spokeswoman for women in sports. He could have had countless women. There were a lot of women in the Olympics making the X sign in support of women in sports. And the male Canadian, one of the male Canadian teams, I don't know which sport it was, made the X sign in support of women.
I think it was the runners. And people keep telling me that they were making the sign for Wakanda. So I don't know. I don't know if it's the XX or what. And I was like, isn't Wakanda a movie? Like, why would, I don't know. That seems kind of stupid if it's true. What's Wakanda? Is it Wakanda a movie or it's like a comic book?
It's the movie of Black Panther. That was the Black utopia in that movie of Black Panther. The perfect society formed. So someone says there are pictures of other Algerian female athletes on their coaches' shoulders. I'd like to see those. I'm not sure I believe that after seeing what was happening to the so many Islamic women in the Olympics. I know that one of the women on the refugee team was censured for flying a cape that said "Free Afghan Women." There are other women who were forced to wear the hijab. The Iranian women knew that they would face horrific punishment if they didn't wear their hijabs on television. I want to see these pictures, these contemporary pictures from the last couple of years of female Algerian athletes riding around on their coaches' shoulders, because I'm not sure that's true until I see it.
Yeah, I don't know either. I mean, it made sense to me, but I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm going to trust Yasmin Mohammed. She's the one who had posted about that.
Okay, it was her. Okay.
Yeah, and Masih Ahmadinejad has also been posting a lot just about the contrast of what's happening to Iranian women and women in the Muslim world, and versus like the celebration of the hijab in the Olympics that's been going on.
I mean, one of the worst ironies about Piers Morgan tweeting that, as I pointed out on X, is that no one would know about this story about Imane Khalif if Redux hadn't broken the story. They were the ones who forced this into the public conversation and outed him and reported on these DNA tests that had been done in 2023, and that they alerted the IOC to, and then they've continued to report on all the athletes. There's other boxers who've spoken out about Imane Khalif. One of his old trainers spoke out, and so on and so forth. And I was like, all of these guys who continue to just talk amongst themselves about these issues and don't talk to or listen to any women, and are so clueless that they don't even realize that the reason that they know about this issue is because of women bringing it up over. They've just blocked that from their heads. And I'm like, I saw a tweet from Elon Musk, or like, well, I mean, Elon still only, retweets or references men who talk about this. He never seems to reference any of the women who have been speaking out about this for so long. But the stories all came from women, and these little feminist blogs or women fighting to be heard in various places where they don't have these large platforms, because I guess, I don't know, their voices are not as loud or as important as these guys. So these guys can take the analysis of women and this information that they've gotten from women and make it their own, and then complain about how we aren't talking about it for all of eternity.
Hey, they're plagiarized all the time. Redux gets constantly plagiarized by bigger outlets that never give them credit for breaking these stories. And those women are amazing. Anna and Genevieve and the rest of that group of women, that I can't even believe the level of in-depth journalism that they're doing on these stories. It's never superficial. They find out, they dig into the histories of these people. And I think it was The Guardian that lifted it first off of them and they got credit for breaking the story.
Oh, really? Okay. I know there was one of the authors messaged me to say thanks for posting her story, because she said that it was one of the stories about Imane Khalif. I'm not sure which one that was published at Redux, and she said that the Daily Mail had plagiarized her entire article. The Guardian may also have done that as well. This may have been a different article, but yeah.
Well, they
so
lift it. They're always lifting things from Redux and claiming to have broken the story.
Yeah. So anyway, I hope that people will go over to Redux and support them.
Yes.
And of course, I just read this story recently about Valentina, who is going to be competing at the Paralympics, which begin at the end of the month in Paris. Valentina is a 50-year-old man, and he's going to be competing in women's track. He's already been breaking records.
He's breaking women's records. Yeah. And I wonder what the level of his visual impairment is.
I wonder too.
His Stargardt disease, is a form of macular degeneration. Most of the people I know with that don't have severe loss of vision. It can cause blindness, but it's treatable now, and usually it's not. I just wonder how blind is he? And we know he's male. He shouldn't be on the team, period. But is he even truly disabled?
Well, the way that I read about this, and the way that athletes, female athletes in any case, the way that female athletes who are blind or are visually impaired to the point where they can't see where they're going, the way that they run these races is with a male runner tethered to them, and they, essentially kind of escort them through the race. And so Valentina does not run with anybody. He runs by himself. So I think that the visual impairment cannot be that bad.
Right.
So I thought that was interesting. Yeah, so lots of visually impaired runners they have a guide with them, and they're tethered. It's a male guide that races beside women. Not all racers choose to have a guide. Valentina Petrillo, is that how you'd say that? I'm saying it the Mexican way, I guess. It does not have one. And I guess this Petrillo, I'm just going to go with Petrillo. If I'm saying it wrong, somebody can correct me in the comments. He came out as trans in 2018 and started HRT in 2019, and he was cleared to compete against female athletes by the International Paralympic Committee President Andrew Parsons, who told BBC Sport that the IPC doesn't enforce an official position for or against allowing men to self-identify into women's sport, but rather allow individual sports to make their own rules in terms of transgender athletes. So the rules are different from sport to sport. So there's just no system at all. So, any man can compete as a woman in the Paralympics, apparently.
In the Paralympics. And that's the people who support this. Yeah, what is wrong with them? I don't think they're just stupid. I think something else going on. There's something so deeply wrong with people who are okay with this, just the injustice of it, but the absurdity of it and the male supremacy of it, all of it is it just makes no sense to me why anyone is celebrating this.
No, and I also read, I think it was probably in Genevieve's Redux article, that Valentina, whose original male name was Fabrizio, he did get some pushback from other female athletes in 2023, and there were some radical feminists, I believe, in Italy, who were saying he should at very least not be allowed into the women's locker room and should have to use a separate locker room. And he got really angry about that and posted on Twitter comparing these women to Nazis who were on the same level as Hitler. And this is a quote from him. I assuming this is a translation. You made me have a terrible time in Ancona. It's not fair. You've relegated me to a dedicated locker room. And he compared this situation to the segregation of people who had the plague. So, they, by forcing him to use a separate locker room and not allowing him into the women's locker room, they were treating him as, diseased or something like that, I guess is what he was trying to convey, which, like, it's not enough for him that he gets to compete as a woman and break women's record as a 50-year-old pervert, but he has to also be allowed into the female locker room. He obviously has a penis and a full body. I guess he's been taking hormones since 2019, which makes little to no difference to anything, except that, I guess maybe he looks grosser than he might have otherwise. But, he has to also be allowed into the women's locker room.
Yeah. And it's like, no, it's not similar to the plague. It's similar to segregating bathrooms and locker rooms by sex, and you're male, so you go into the male one. I can't believe this is happening. And then even those arguments of, well, he has a penis. I don't care if he's castrated himself and had surgeons drill a hole in his penis and his pelvis and invert his penis so he can pretend to have a vagina. He still doesn't belong in the women's locker room because he's male and you can't change your sex. It really makes you wonder if some like inverse Freudian thing is going on in the human psyche, that so many men think it's so unfair that they can't be female, that they really have this like seething resentment of women and believe they have this right to be us. I just don't understand the psychological pathology going on with this phenomenon and the support of the phenomenon that's happening.
Yeah, I feel like this guy offered me some insight into what these men are thinking in terms of, because I'm sort of like, are these guys just brazenly cheating, or do they literally believe they're women, or do they think that it's something else? And I think this guy in any case seems to think that, he's doing something groundbreaking by competing with women, and that he's there's a quote that I read in outsports.com where he says, I'm going to do the most beautiful thing, the one I've dreamed of in life. I'm running with women. He thinks that he's going to be some kind of like historical groundbreaking heroine, I think, in some ways.
It's like a perversion of Clarissa Pinkola Estes' work of perverts who run with the women.
Yeah, and he's an autogynephile, if that needs to be said about these guys anymore. He there's also a quote from him that I read in some article somewhere where he says that he I think in the BBC Sports, he at 9 years old he was trying on his mother's clothing, and he says that he clearly remembers the day when at 9 he put on his mother's, I'm changing the pronouns here in the BBC, it was her. He put on his mother's skirt for the first time, and he said, it was an incredible emotion. It was like touching heaven with your fingertip. Isn't that weird?
Yeah, it is weird. It is weird. And it's male paraphilias are so disturbing and dark and gross. And the fact that they have become the social justice movement of our time to like let perverts perv freely wherever they want and punish all women who have a problem with that. It says a lot. But here, like he was becoming a pervert as a boy, and it makes me think terrible things like, should we do conversion therapy for these guys? Like, what do you do with these pervs who are then going to come bother us later in life?
Well, yeah, I know. I don't know what to make of that either, because I'm like, if grown men are developing these fetishes and perversions when they're little kids, and this is something that I always sort of get confused about or wonder about, because there's a lot of insistence, I think for very good reason, that kids don't have sexualities. And the good reason is, of course, so that pedophiles can't justify sexualizing kids in any way. But it's not entirely true, because I feel like there's a lot of lesbians and gays who felt that they were lesbian or gay when they were quite young. And then, of course, I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say that this fetish that he was developing when he was a kid was necessarily sexual, but it obviously became sexual at some point. And I guess I wonder how that happens, or where would we and how would we cut it off before it turns into a full grown fetish? I think one of the ways is maybe not making it totally acceptable, and like embracing it and celebrating it all the time in public.
Which, when this goes too far and the pendulum inevitably swings in the other direction, we will see a return to shame and other social control techniques to try to normal people up into other norms and standards. A lot of guys used to be shamed out of these behaviors or staying in the closet. I think, okay, if he is just an autogynephile, like Phil Illey, who needs more attention now, maybe Phil is right that these guys deserve their own respect as just autogynephiles, and we can just acknowledge that they're men who really want to be women and get off on thinking that they're women. I don't think that's going to be enough for them, but it would go a long way to breaking the cultural spell that this is just these poor souls trapped in the wrong body, and how dare you be a mean woman and not let this woman who got trapped in a man's body compete against other women in the Paralympics. If we could acknowledge it's a sexual fetish, I think it would break the spell somewhat culturally. The old sexologists who studied this, like Ray Blanchard, have all been silenced, and you can't find any studies on that aspect of it going on anymore. And at the university level, no one's allowed to call it a fetish. No one's allowed to admit what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, those guys who first did that research and published that research about the fact that these trans guys were actually autogynephiles were attacked and canceled and fired and pushed out of their careers and so on and so forth. And it was hard to even say that. Again, it's one of those things that I remember radical feminists, like I think Sheila Jeffries saying, it's a fetish. And that was sort of, I remember when I first heard that, I didn't totally understand, because I didn't know about the autogynephilia thing yet. And it's sort of a shocking thing to say. At least it's become more normalized now, but people would still get really, really offended and act like that's hate speech. When I say things like that in talks, when I just say outright, these are men with fetishes, people get really offended and say that I'm being hateful, which is weird, because I thought that we were supposed to be in a, post-shame world. And if fetishes are fine, then why is it offensive if I point out that these men have fetishes?
Exactly. I think these men with fetishes, many of them are in positions of a lot of power, needed to create the trans child narrative for cover, right? Because you can't say Jazz Jennings was a fetishist, right? When he was being medically transitioned from the time he was just a little boy, by his mother and a lot of medical providers that were, his mother couldn't do it on her own. The poor kid. Yes, his mother is incredibly culpable in the situation, but all those mad scientists and doctors that castrated this kid on TV, deserve a lot of, they deserve criminal charges, in my opinion. But you can't, these little boys that they're transing, give cover to the perverted men who are just like Bruce Jenner stealing their teenage stepdaughter's underwear and jacking off in it. He admitted to doing that, and people still think he's a respectable member of society and an actual woman. It's disgusting.
He was in that first Vanity Fair article where they presented him in that corset and essentially, and I
Yes,
think
of
when he
course
was
it is.
awarded Woman of the Year by Glamour magazine or whatever else, I think he was awarded Woman of the Year by a
Yeah.
couple of different magazines. So but there was that big cover story on him, and he was on the front of Vanity Fair and in
With
the
his hands
bikini,
behind him. He can't show his hands. I
looking
wonder why.
very feminine. Yeah. Yeah, and you know, he's in that article, the reporter, the guy who wrote the story, who interviewed him, he talks about wearing pantyhose under his suits, which I think to anybody would demonstrate a fetish because that's incredibly uncomfortable. You know, pantyhose are gross. I'm so glad that women aren't expected to wear pantyhose with their skirts and dresses anymore.
Right.
Yeah, it's not a nice feeling to wear pantyhose. It's
Mm-mm.
uncomfortable and kind of gross in my opinion. It can itchy, they fall down, you know.
Yeah, they're awful. They're
Yeah.
hot. They're uncomfortable. They run. Yeah, and it was a way for women to cover their shame. You know, you can't show your bare legs, so pantyhose were invented. And then like so much of this female fashion that was invented to make us uncomfortable, it's been fetishized by these men as what makes you female. Like they think it actually is what makes them female is to wear this uncomfortable fetish wear.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I do think that we do need to pay some credit to Elon Musk because I feel like I don't know where else would we be talking about any of this?
Mm,
Like there's nowhere else on social media or on the internet, I think, that we can talk about aside from, you know, our own personal blogs and things like that,
right.
which is of course what we did for so long. But I do feel like a lot of the conversation has been normalized on new Twitter, on X, and yeah, and you know they're going after him so hard that it makes me
Right.
worried. Like I know he's a billionaire, but the EU is trying to totally shut him down. The Democrats would love to shut him down, obviously.
Yeah, and I mean, he's not immune to assassination even, you know, throughout
Mm.
human history, kings get assassinated. You know how I hate praising billionaires, but I am grateful Elon Musk bought Twitter and it has opened up discourse. I see a lot of my friends who are still liberals or on the left that now using Twitter in their world is coded as you're a Trumper, you're a right winger. Like the whole platform has been demonized on the left, and people won't even use it anymore for fear of being outed as an ex user. So
Yeah, they all say I was talking to some friends recently actually, and they were complaining about how bad Twitter had gotten. And I was like, what? It's great. I love it. And they were like, oh, that's just because you're allowed back. And I was like, well, yeah, I like being
yeah,
back. But
that's
I
nice.
was
Yeah,
to be fair, I was like, I loved Twitter even before I was kicked off of Twitter. And I was really genuinely sad about getting kicked off of Twitter because I don't really like any of the other social media platforms. And I had kind of avoided using them in a public way. Like I had my own personal Facebook page and a personal Instagram. I didn't want to create public work pages, but I have to for my work because I work for
right.
myself. Who else is going to promote my stuff for me? But you know, like I do genuinely like Twitter as a platform because it's a writing, talking platform. But you know, like I was a bit baffled because I was like, why? I was like, do people genuinely think that it's bad, or do they think that it's bad because it's not the same as it was for them before Elon took it over? Like, do they I know that there's issues with X in terms of things like bots. It seems like a lot of the porn bots have gone away. It doesn't seem as
Mm-hmm.
bad as it was for a very long time. I have my
Right.
own personal complaints about it. I still am not allowed to have a subscribe button for no apparent reason. But I like, yeah, that I think that, and you hear that a lot from progressives and you know the kinds of people that love Twitter and were I think probably okay. I'm not saying my friends were necessarily okay with my censorship, but I just thought it was an interesting perspective, because I was like, I don't think it's worse. I think that it's better. I think I'm like, to me, it's so fun because it's kind of like
Yeah,
wild and crazy. Like, yeah, there are all sorts of
right,
offensive things there. There's things that offend me on there all the time, but it's fun, you
right.
know?
I think they think it's bad because they're told to think it's bad. I think that many, many, many people, perhaps the majority of people who are still on the political left, are pro censorship and honestly believe that the government should prevent people
Yeah.
whose opinions they dislike from speaking. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's
I
gross.
Yeah, and people, yeah, I mean, I think that what I'm being reminded of all the time and surprised by, I guess, because now I've limited myself to freedom bubbles instead of left bubbles, is that most people don't really have a problem with censorship or authoritarianism, and they actually think it's good.
Hmm.
I was on a date with a guy on the weekend, and he was saying that, like, he was sort of arguing in favor of the vaccine mandates, because it's like, well, you have to, I mean, the fact that you would think that the
Yeah.
vaccine actually worked and was a good thing was like, enough. But like, then, to argue in favor of the mandates, because in principle, you have to think about what's best for the population. So he was referencing other vaccines where, they had to force people to get vaccinated, and that got rid of polio or whatever it is. So therefore, vaccine mandates are a good thing, and you have to think about it in terms of, what's best for the collective, essentially what's best for the larger population. And if one individual person doesn't want to get it, and it means that everybody's going to get the measles, then too bad for that one person. So that's, I'm saying this to say
Yeah.
this is how a lot of people think, and it's not totally irrational, but to me, it's just too dangerous.
It's somewhat irrational because if the vaccine works, it shouldn't matter if your neighbor got it or not, if you're just trying to protect yourself. I guess there's the public health perspective of what was being said during the mandates of, well, the unvaccinated people are going to clog the system. And if I'm having a heart attack, the ER is going to be full of the anti-vaxxers. So therefore they should be denied medical care. But the bigger issue is, it's fascinating someone can still think that way after watching this rushed, poorly studied, completely ineffectual at ending an epidemic vaccine being forced on people. Like he witnessed what we all witnessed, that it was Trump's warp speed vaccine. There were only a few weeks of data in the studies that the mandates were based on, and it didn't end up working. And shouldn't that make you more wary of the government forcing you to do things than keep you still in favor of that?
I think that there's a lot of people in the world who do believe that the vaccines did a lot of good. There's a lot of people who believe that the vaccines saved lives and that things would have been much worse and a lot more people would have died if not for the vaccines. I don't think there's any evidence to support that. But I mean, if you're going to think about it in those terms, like, that's a good place to start if you want to start defending forcing people into health decisions or taking medicine or whatever it is against their will. A lot of vaccines do work and have done a lot of good. I'm not saying they haven't. This vaccine, I think, didn't do anything for anybody.
No.
Mine, I think, did more harm than good. And I don't see how anybody could prove otherwise, because I don't see how would you determine that, this person who took the vaccine would have died if they hadn't taken the vaccine of COVID?
Exactly. Omicron is what got us out of the severity of the epidemic. Nature's mutation of the COVID virus into something less deadly but more contagious that escaped vaccine immunity. That's what changed the game. I mean, I worked as a primary healthcare provider during the whole time and watched it happen. The vaccine didn't stop COVID from being so deadly. The mutations did. And from that argument, from a purely public health perspective, if you're only looking at the variables of of illness, death, money spent in the healthcare system, you could argue that the government should be able to force all mothers to breastfeed. And even though I'm very pro breastfeeding and I think that it improves the health of the population, I would never, ever support something like that because it's totalitarianism. You can't force people to do things with their bodies. That's what the Nuremberg laws are all about, is no forced medical care, no forced medical experimentation on humans, no forced or coerced medical care is what the Nuremberg Code says.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's what the argument is about. It's not about whether or not the vaccine worked. It's that on an ethical level, you can't force people to engage in medical procedures against their will because it's draconian. So anyway.
Are you going on another date with the forced vaxxer?
Probably not. This is somebody that I've known for a very long time. It wasn't just a random person. It's actually kind of a like an interesting story. It's somebody that I dated in 2012. And then things did not work out in sort of like a dramatic fashion that was sort of mostly my fault. But I mean, he also wanted to get married and have kids I'm not saying with me, but with somebody, and I didn't want to do that. So I think that in the long run, it's better that we separated. And clearly he also said that he would probably he would probably vote for Kamala. So I'm not saying that, I would only date people who agree with me on everything. I'm happy to have interesting conversations or debates about these things. But, the vaccine thing and I think part of it is that I'm not sure how much I want to date somebody who goes along with all the rules again, because I did that before and it was really annoying. Like when COVID was going on, I was in a relationship with somebody who was, kind of into the rules. And was like, I remember going into, like a Target or something like that. And they wanted me to put a mask on and I didn't. I just kind of like ignored it. Like I had ignored it unless somebody tried to force me to. And then I'd be like, fine, whatever, I'll leave your store then. And, like I would do it. I would find ways to avoid it. I would drink out of a water bottle the whole time or whatever. And this guy was like, He said mask up to me. And I was like, if you ever say that to me again, I'm leaving. Don't ever say that. Like, I was like, do not order me to follow the rules. That's not who I am. That's not my personality. I'm refusing on principle, not just because I don't like it, although I don't like it. And I'm not going to be ordered by my partner to follow the rules, Megan. Like, okay, you should find a new girlfriend if that's the kind of woman that you want to date. Like, fuck you.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't sound like a great match.
Anyway, I think.
Yeah, I'm concerned that so many people go along with the rules. I think that, just being reminded of the stupid cloth masking and the clean and dirty pens and the arrows on the floor, all the insane rules. And then circling back to the pronouns as the point of the wedge for the mind control with the gender stuff. And then with Twitter and the previous censoring of speech on behalf of the US government, censoring quote unquote mis and disinformation on Twitter. And now what's happening in the UK and Canada, we are really marching into more and more totalitarianism, and the masses are just going along with every new rollout of it. And I'm scared. I'm really concerned about what's going to happen.
Yeah. Do you want to talk more about the EU stuff or what's happening in the UK? I mean, the EU's trying to end Twitter, I think. And I think that, there's a couple of things going on, but I think that, the UK has always been for some time trying to throw people in jail for hate speech. And And that
Right.
seems to be what they're continuing on. I'm just looking for this tweet. Oh yeah, so there was a tweet from the UK government official X channel saying, "Think before you post." and underneath there's a tweet from the Crown Prosecution Service that also says, "Think before you post content," and it has a little phone symbol and a little hands up stop sign, and it says, "Content cute," right?
Yeah.
Content that incites violence or hatred isn't just harmful, it can be illegal. And then they say the Crown Prosecution Service takes online violence
Online
seriously
violence.
and
They
will
don't mean,
prosecute when the
yeah.
legal test is met. Oh, this is a really creepy tweet as I'm saying it all out loud. Remind those close to you to share responsibly or face the consequences.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's scary. That's really scary.
Yeah.
And it's been going on for a while. You know, we know women who have had the police show up at their house for their social media posts. We know there's not official freedom of speech in UK, but this is the first time, in my understanding, that the government has gotten so blatant about it, of telling people to be careful what they post. And haven't there been over 1,000 investigations or possibly arrests over the last couple of weeks about online posting? I think many people are being investigated right now.
I don't know how many, but I have heard that there have been a bunch. The language is awful, and it's exactly what the Canadian government under the Liberal Party, under Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party, are going for.
How does anyone support this? This is what I don't understand, is how anyone thinks this is a good idea and is not terrified by this level of government overreach into our speech and our thoughts and our beliefs.
I think they're certain that they're good. I think that they're certain that they're good and right, and that we, or whoever it is that's posting what they define as hate speech or online violence on the internet is bad. There's no argument for them, and you can tell in the fact that they say far right just as self-explanatory. Like,
Right.
these people are far right, like Megan's far right, or this group, Tommy Robinson is far right. He may well be far right. I don't really know very much about this guy, so I'm not going to get into who he is or what he is or whatever, but I think that I don't really trust anybody who talks about people that way anymore. But they don't feel any need to say this person did or said this, and this is why I think that they're racist or otherwise offensive or dangerous or whatever. They just say they're far right, like that's a bad thing. Like, you're supposed to be like me, I'm good. This is obviously bad. So I think it's just that they're very certain that they would never be on the wrong side politically.
Right. It's so distressing. And it's happening here that we have Tim Walz, who set up a snitch line running for vice president, and then he's
Can you imagine voting for somebody who set up a COVID snitch line to snitch on your neighbors for COVID infractions?
And he instructed either police or National Guard who were policing during COVID and during the George Floyd riots, to shoot citizens with rubber bullets with paint bullets if they weren't following the COVID curfews. He's a really scary guy, and he's made multiple public statements about the First Amendment does not cover misinformation and disinformation or hate speech, which is not true. We have had many Supreme Court decisions that say there's no such thing as hate speech. The First Amendment is absolute, except in cases where you're literally directly inciting people to violence against a specific target. You can't use your speech that way. But misinformation and disinformation are not legal terms, but he believes the government should censor those. And then I think it was yesterday, Robert F. Kennedy posted how a Washington Post journalist had asked the White House spokeswoman why they weren't censoring Twitter. So we have a major journal, there's this major center of journalism, which is supposed to be all about the First Amendment in the United States, encouraging the executive branch of our government to censor speech and to police what can be said on Twitter. It's a very dark time, a really, really scary time.
Yeah, and they were taking it very seriously. They're like, yeah, good question. That's important to consider how we're going to deal with this kind of thing. I mean, they don't think that they're being bad or evil in any way at all. They think that they're being helpful and good and reasonable, which is really strange. It's strange the extent to which people really do operate in different worlds, and we're all just talking past each other, right? Like they don't have any idea how we think or how we see the world, and I can't really understand. I do understand. I shouldn't say that. I do understand how they see the world, and I've said this before, but part of the reason that I understand is because I was like that a bit. You know, when I was a leftist, I did think that I was good and right and better than, you know, the right or conservatives. Not really even the right. It was more like the liberals and the neoliberals who I thought weren't left enough, right? You know, I just thought, I did think that it was okay to impose my ideas and my ideology and my vision of the world on other people because I was the good one who cared about the downtrodden and they were the bad, greedy, selfish ones or stupid or whatever it is. So I do get it. But yeah, I mean, it would help a lot if people were engaging with one another and engaging with people who are different than them, really, which is a big reason, of course, why this cancel culture and these efforts to shut down various events is so dangerous, because it ensures that they can continue to operate in their bubble and not understand what people's concerns are and just go along convinced that they're right and good and that we're bad and dangerous and should be in jail.
Right. I don't know how, just living in the United States, I don't know how we're going to get out of this without a civil war. It feels really contentious to me, and people are living in such, like you're saying, they're living in completely different realities, and they have no compassion for their neighbors who think differently than they do, and they have no interest in dialogue or trying to come to an understanding of the other person's worldview. And every day the gap between the realities widens, and people are getting angrier and angrier with each other. And I know many liberals and Democrats and people are so deranged by their hatred of Trump, who honestly believe Trump supporters should be jailed, that people should be removed from society for voting for someone that they don't like.
Yeah, I mean, they all think that Trump is guilty of hate speech too. I mean, the EU, they were trying to figure out how to censor Elon Musk's X space with Trump, essentially because they were accusing Trump of pre-crime. You know, they were accusing him of, you know, he would engage in hate speech in this space, and how can we deal with this, and how can we pre-censor it in order to do that, which is just crazy. Because I mean, I didn't listen to the whole thing, or I just listened to little parts here and there, so I can't really speak to that in any detail. But as far as I'm aware, he didn't engage in anything that could be considered hate speech. And it's crazy that they think that they should have the power to stop that conversation from happening. I mean, he's running for president.
Exactly. And he is the former president. They really have delegitimized him so much that they don't believe he was like actually he doesn't deserve credit as former president in their minds. And it's just so fractured. A lot of people still like Trump. It feels like there's no way he's going to win now, but who knows what could happen? Things have been turning, like, completely 180 shift in reality week to week over the last couple of weeks here. We're just a month out from an assassination attempt that no one's talking about anymore. There's no investigation into it. Then we were all told Biden was competent and had never been better. Then suddenly Biden is removed from running and everyone loves Harris. And it's who knows what could happen next week. Anything could happen.
Yeah, I mean, I know. It's hard for me to believe that Kamala Harris is going to win this thing, although of course anything can happen, but it's weird. I mean, she doesn't stand for anything. She doesn't have a position on anything. Like, people online are, I don't know, the right wingers or the conservatives or the James Lindsay types are calling her like a Marxist or a communist. It's like, she's not a communist or a Marxist. She's like a careerist. Like, she's a politician. Like, she says nothing ever. Nothing that comes out of her mouth is anything.
She's done horrible things that leftists didn't like just a few weeks ago. She was a mass incarceration enthusiast. She suggested that parents whose children missed more than 10 days of school a year should be jailed in the state of California. She kept men in jail past their sentencing dates, past their release dates to get more cheap and free labor out of them, which is slavery. That is literally being enslaved by the state. She supported state-funded cosmetic surgery to make men look like women in the prison system, for all the gender-affirming surgery she supported. Many of her positions are clear and odious. And Tim Walz is a really scary guy with his behavior during COVID and his believing the government should censor speech and turning Minnesota into a trans refuge state where anyone related or not to a child can essentially kidnap a child from their parents and bring them to Minnesota to be castrated against their parents' will, and the state will make the child a ward of the Minnesota state and keep the child's parents from having any power over the situation. These are scary people. They're scary people.
Too. But again, there's millions of people who think that they're the good ones and they're the nice ones, and that Trump's the fascist. So, and what do you think is going to happen with RFK Jr.? I mean, he's apparently, a judge decided he wasn't even allowed to be on the ballot in New York State.
Yeah, which is interesting because that is the state he was a resident of for a long time. You don't have to be a resident of the judge said he wasn't a resident of the state, but you don't have to be a resident of a state to run for president. Obviously, the presidential candidates aren't citizens of all 50 states and Puerto Rico and Guam. They, for some reason, said that he didn't qualify to be on the ballot. That's a big state. They're going after him hard for somebody who they say is not a threat and is just crazy. They really have done everything they could they do everything they can to keep him from getting any press. They do everything they can to defame him and make him seem crazy. He's obviously a threat.
Yeah, it's really upsetting. Again, I mean, I would love to vote for him. I don't really know what the point would be, but I mean, it's just such a charade, the whole thing.
Most of my friends who are really hardcore Trumpers think that Kennedy should get out of the race and endorse Trump. But I disagree. I think Kennedy stands for something completely different than what Trump stands for. I think Kennedy has a lot of great positions and ideas, and no one else is promoting those. I think that he's a very smart guy. I don't agree with him 100% on everything, which is, of course, not the case with I'm not going to agree with any other human 100%. I wish he had a chance. I wish that the Democrats had been Democratic and allowed a primary in the spring. Kennedy wanted to run, Marianne Williamson, Dane Phillips. They refused to run they are the most undemocratic people. They're doing everything they accused Trump of doing. They're getting rid of elections. They are promoting censoring speech. They are censoring speech. They have snitch lines. They're sterilizing children, and they claim to be the only thing saving us from fascism.
Yeah, it's insane. I wanted to point out, just because there was a comment earlier from someone in the super chat, Westy40, who pointed out that this is in reference to Imane Khalif's status as female, that, you know, of course, it would be very easy for, you know, like he wants there to be a court case to punish people for harassing him, i.e. saying that he's male online. But, you know, if he really wanted to refute those claims or accusations, it could be done very easily if he simply showed a DNA test, if he just did a cheek swab showing that his chromosomes were XX instead of XY, which he's choosing not to, which I think, you know, to me, like, there's no, that you can't say that there's any definitive proof. I still could be wrong. I could be proven wrong if he does manage to produce a DNA test showing XX, and then I guess all of these doctors and reporters and his ex-trainer and so on and so forth, they're all lying. There's some kind of conspiracy against him. But, you know, the fact that he chose not to pursue an appeal when he was disqualified by the IBA, and that he's claiming to be so incensed by these accusations and it's hateful, but won't just do a test. Like, why don't you just do a DNA test? Like, why don't you just offer some proof of your femaleness beyond just insisting that you're female over and over and over again?
Right. And then his defenders both say he's an XY woman, and all of these idiotic women who are like, I just learned that women can have XY chromosomes and even get pregnant. They can't. That can't happen. It cannot happen. Like, I just learned that, you know, you can have XY chromosomes and be a regular woman. It's no, this is a male with a disorder of sexual development who went through a male puberty. So the defense of him is all about this intersex thing, but at the same time, people are saying that he might also be XY. Just do the test. Just prove it. Just you know, do the cheek swab. It's not invasive at all to just have a Q-tip put in. You could do it yourself. Put it on the side of your cheek, and we can see your chromosomes.
Yeah, that's one of the things that Linda pointed out when I talked to her on Friday, which, for people who are listening, that podcast is now available on Spotify. It was behind a paywall because I release everything for early access to paid subscribers, but now it's on the regular podcast. But yeah, she was like, you know, it's like the least invasive test ever, you know, even compared to the other kinds of testing that athletes are obligated to do, drug testing and so on and so forth. And like the idea that it's invasive, it's like, well, then how do you ensure that people aren't cheating if any kind of testing in sport is invasive or, you know, abusive? Somehow I think people were calling it abusive. Yeah.
But they have to pee in front of witnesses to prove that they're not doping. That's kind of invasive. You know, you have to provide a urine sample under observation to make sure you're not doping. That's just, you know, that's the case for a lot of elite athletes. A cheek swab is not very invasive. And these elite athletes they're managed like prize racehorses. Their managers and coaches monitor everything they put in their mouths, every minute of exercise they do. They can't take an ibuprofen without clearing it with the Olympic Committee. Their lives are under a lot of invasive scrutiny to begin with. A cheek swab is the least of it.
Yeah, and I mean, the irony of, you know, I think that people were calling J.K. Rowling abusive and the rest of us, of course, when we're talking about apparently, probably, maybe a male beating up women.
Yeah.
You know, the irony is just a lot to behold, but it's abusive to ask for a cheek swab,
right,
to prove that he's not cheating.
How many of these people who think a cheek swab is really abusive and invasive and dehumanizing. We're absolutely fine requiring all of us to stick swabs up our nose to our pharynx, every 3 days to prove we didn't have COVID for over a year. That went on for years, and they were all fine with it. The Venn diagrams of the people who supported that level of invasive testing and the people who are now saying it's too invasive to do a cheek swab on this athlete to see if he's male or female almost perfectly overlap. And that is what's driving me insane, is the lack of ideological consistency in these people.
Yeah, I mean, we were all forced to get those swabs up our nose, which were actually pretty painful.
Horrible.
Over and over and over again every time you wanted to fly. Some people had to do them so that they could go to work, just to prove that they didn't have a cold, just to be able to operate in society, to move around and to work. And these, the most elite athletes in the world can't do a cheek swab to prove that they're either male or female so that they're competing in the right category. Like, give me a break.
Right.
This is what I mean about the people being stupid. Like, it's stupid. That doesn't make sense. That's not rational thinking, right?
No, it's not. It's dangerously stupid.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
It was nice to see you again. And
good to see you too. Thank
you, everyone, for tuning in. Huh?
I wonder what will happen over the next week. Some exciting things to talk about.
Maybe we'll get a test result.
And that would be amazing. Yeah.
I would love to see a test results. And yeah, we could stop yelling at each other online.
Oh, I doubt.
Not really.
Lead to peace. I doubt that. When did the facts
would be solved?
Yeah, the facts never settle these situations. But
we still have Valentina competing in the Paralympics to look forward to. Looking forward to him breaking some new women's records, I'm sure.
And maybe he'll finally, be allowed to perv on disabled women in the dressing room.
It's only fair.
It's only fair.
We're not Nazis after all.
Good to see you. Bye, everybody.
Yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in, and don't forget to like and subscribe and tune in every Wednesday. We're here at 6 p.m. Pacific and 9 p.m. Eastern, and Mary Lou's on Substack at Mary Lou Singleton, and I'm on Substack at meganmurphy.ca. You can get my gay and retarded shirt on fourthwall.com or by clicking the shop tab at meganmurphy.ca. And yeah, buy tickets to our event Detransing Canada on September 14th in Victoria at an undisclosed location, because that's the only way that we're allowed to say that men aren't women in Canada, is by sneaking around.
Fun.
Okay, take care.
Around.
Okay, bye everyone.